Fiction writing is a person's attempt to simulate reality, and as such, research is often a large part of the process. For instance, if you want to give your alien society a sense of realism, or if you want to write about a trauma that you don't know enough about. The issue is that, while most research can be done with a simple online search, like how does a helicopter work, there is also information that a simple online search can't provide as easily. What if you really want to say something with your story? You see a flaw in the system and you feel that you have to make people aware of it, or you think you have found the solution to the problems of the world and you want to share them. There are lots of ways that you can be wrong about your message or about what you think is reality and what is truth. No matter if it's a social issue that you have no experience in or something that you've been living in for the past decade. There are lots of ways that you can be wrong about your message. The thing is, there are various types of echo chamber, psychologically speaking. And so, even with many years of experience, your take on the issue could still be wrong or lacking in perspectives. So this week's video, as well as next week's video, we'll be talking about how we go about research, handling data, verification and fact-checking, what echo chambers exist and which one you have, so you can make sure that you always have all the information that you need in order to make an informed decision, whatever decision that may be. Let's dive right in with how the psychological group of the convincers reach a judgment. Convincers express the cognitive functions of introverted feeling and extroverted thinking. Introverted feeling is your emotional investment, or in other words, how you feel about something. In the writing modes video, I explained that how you feel about something depends on what you know about the thing, and that is why introverted feeling is connected to extroverted thinking, which is the function that gathers data. Like for instance, a person's past deeds, achievements, or titles. However, extroverted thinking looks at a lot more data than just that. TE in general wants to outsource thinking. TE users ask people for their opinions in order to have their own introverted feeling feel this way or that way about something. You look at statistics and reviews and critics, and all of that informs your FI judgment. Why do convincers outsource their thinking is the question. Well, convincers don't have a lot of confidence in their ability to validate premises. What the hell does that mean? A premise is the basis of a logical conclusion. A premise is, for instance, all the people in this political party are corrupt. So now we can go on making conclusions. Person A belongs to this political party, so now the conclusion is person A is corrupt. That is a very simple example, and I only use it to explain what a premise is here. The difference between TI and FI users is this. TI users generally don't check premises. They focus way more on the process of making these conclusions. In the next video, I'll give you guys some realistic examples of what that looks like. But for now, the point is that TI does come with a certain confidence, one might say, or ignorance. FI users, however, introverted feeling users, generally doubt their premises, even the obvious ones. They always feel more comfortable asking other people's opinions on a matter. When I was working in a hospital, for instance, I had this brilliant doctor supervisor, a very strong extroverted thinking user, and she always knew all the processes and how to do everything, yet even when she just explained how it all works, she would still pose these little questions to the rest of us. What do you think? What do you think about this? That's why sometimes you see people asking questions even though the answer is super obvious and plain as day, and they really just have to put one and one together. Like when I'm having a biochemistry exercise in the lab and there is a manual and the instructor tells me to just follow the manual. Yes, but how do I know if I understand the manual correctly? So I ask questions about every single step. Us convincers are never quite sure whether we have missed something and whether the premise that we have in front of us is really valid as such. Before we can look at the two types of echo chambers that convincers create for themselves, we finally have to introduce the concept of the function stack. Because Jungian cognitive functions are usually depicted organized in such a function stack, with the function that is expressed the strongest right there on top, and the further we go down, the weaker they are expressed. And everything below the fourth function is the shadow of your consciousness, basically the unconscious. And everything below that is something that is expressed without you being aware of it. The convincers express introverted feeling and extroverted thinking as part of their four top functions, and introverted thinking and extroverted feeling as part of their four shadow functions. In other words, if you are a convincer, then your introverted feeling can be stronger than your extroverted thinking and the other way around. And with that knowledge, we can now finally start talking about echo chambers. Okay, so now let's look at this graph. Here we have a person who has extroverted thinking stronger than their introverted feeling. If this is the case with you, then your extroverted thinking gathers a lot of people's opinions in order to find a majority consensus, so that introverted feeling knows how to feel about issue A. And then this person might even look up all the opinions about these opinions and whether they are credible sources or not. Because you can also feel a certain way about certain sources and media outlets, for instance, and their opinions have more weight if you feel good about them. So you see, it's a constant game of comparing the credibility and significance of different sources and opinions. The problem, if your TE is very strong, is that you oftentimes ignore the weight of opinions and data points. Strong extroverted thinking is all about expanding the dataset more and more and more, and every data point is just one among many. You have a situation like this, a data meadow. Many data points and only very few investment towers. Investment towers are opinions or data points that you have identified as significant. And then, if there is a data point that disproves everything, you can just dismiss it because it's just one data point and so many other data points point in the other direction. Strong extroverted thinking wants to look only at which opinion is more frequently represented, because they simply have a harder time figuring out which opinions are significant because their introverted feeling is not as strong as their extroverted thinking. What you guys need to do is stop expanding your data sets so that you are forced to utilize your introverted feeling more to figure out which input and which data points and which opinions are more valuable and more significant and more important than the rest. Now let's look at what happens if your introverted feeling is stronger than your extroverted thinking. Then you likely already have a certain investment in your favorite sources, and you attribute more value to their opinions, and you probably leave out opinions from sources that you don't value. We can already see that this is a well-known and very common echo chamber. I only get my information from this media outlet or from this person because I feel good about them, I feel like they are trustworthy, or I feel like they do the most fact-checking, etc. But in reality, all that feeling is likely based on things like how they present themselves, or for instance, if they affirm your pre-existing beliefs. Because strong introverted feeling users develop this investment really fast. And once they are invested, gathering more opinions only threatens their investment. So they automatically start to avoid that. I might have already mentioned this before, but your values, aka your introverted feeling investments, is in a very real sense an expression of your identity. Hence, if someone threatens your investment, it'll feel like a personal attack, like your value is being deprecated. And that is why these strong introverted feeling users have high stakes in ignoring other data points and inputs. Because in a very real sense, they are trying to protect their own sense of self-worth. This is also the reason why strong introverted feeling users tend to be afraid of feedback when it comes to writing. I've seen quite a few writers with very high introverted feeling who wait a very long time until they expose their stories to feedback, because they want to make sure that the feedback they get will be good. So they keep fixing their stories and using their own uninformed standards as guidelines, and then they might even skip writing groups as a whole and send their stories directly to publishers, which gives them another year in which they can delude themselves waiting for an answer, until reality finally destroys all their investments. And this happens literally all the time. Strong emotional investment also screws with personality typing, by the way. It is very typical for introverted feeling users to mistype themselves as introverted thinking users, because in the community, generally speaking, introverted thinking users have a higher reputation and earn more respect. And then these introverted feeling users get so invested in that idea that they ignore all the evidence pointing in the other direction. Introverted feeling users have a tendency to interpret everything in a way that confirms their investments and their pre-existing beliefs, and they can delude themselves that way. This happened to me a bunch of times, actually. I saw evidence pointing me 180 degrees in the other direction, and I still somehow found a way to interpret it in a way that it confirms my beliefs. So yeah, this struggle for strong introverted feeling users is very much a real thing. We are the kings and queens of delusions. My advice to strong introverted feeling users is that we just have to accept the disappointment. Join the disappointing reality, because you cannot succeed in reality if you never leave your world of delusions behind. You have a situation like this: many things that you have emotional investment on, but not a lot of data input, which means not a lot of rational cause to justify that investment. You just are invested, and you actively ignore further input in order to protect that investment. Strong introverted feeling users oftentimes cheat themselves by doing this occasional pseudo fact checking, where we basically look at one more source so that we can say we did look at other sources. Or we research the credibility of the contradicting source, and we look at all the negative bits, and we use that as a justification to dismiss them as a source. But we obviously don't give the same treatment to our preferred sources. Now let's talk about how convincers ask for a solution. In this super complicated graph, we see a convincer using their extroverted thinking to ask the introverted thinking of other people on how to solve a problem. The first two people they ask are supporters, and these supporters use their introverted thinking to simplify everything, and they came up with solutions to the problem. How that works we'll discuss in next week's video. These supporters also use their extroverted feeling to be nice and tactful about the truth, so they try to not hurt the convincer's feelings and emotional investments, because as we know, the truth can hurt feelings, right? But the third person we ask is another convincer. We try to outsource our thinking, but that convincer's TI is also weak. They don't know what premises are correct and valid, so they respond with their own extroverted thinking. They give a bunch of references and opinions that they themselves are emotionally invested in, not, however, any solutions they themselves came up with. Alright, that's it for the first deep dive into how we research and handle data. I hope this was helpful, insightful, and not too complicated. And next week we'll give the same treatment to the supporter writers, and we'll discuss introverted thinking in excruciating detail. I hope I'll see you then.